I'm going to teach you some terminology that you will use for the rest of this section of notes, also all through physiology. So make sure that you examine to see whether you've got questions about this, because it doesn't go away. And I hadn't had it before this point in anatomy. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is not how how this nervous system is organized structurally, which is what we did before, which like CNS and PNS, right? Now we're going to talk about the functional organization of the nervous system, and then it'll allow us to sort of deepen our structural understanding as well. Okay, so we're going to build something like this, and I gave you a place in your notes to build it. So that might be a big enough space for you. If it's not, make it bigger before you fill it in. So let's start building that. Okay, so with the functional organization of the nervous system. So I'm going to draw it for you first, and then I'll elaborate on each part a little deeper if I need to. Okay. All right, so we kind of started talking about this before, but let's say, okay, there's the central nervous system, and we're not going to talk about its structure much in this set of notes. In the next one, we will. There is the peripheral nervous system, and then communication between them. Is it one way or two ways? So does information go from the central nervous system through the peripheral nervous system, from the peripheral nervous system through the central nervous system, or both? It's actually both. So it goes in through the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. It goes out from the central nervous system through the peripheral nervous system. So if we go back to our hand on a hot stove example, if I put my hand on a hot stove, the information will come through the peripheral nervous system, and the information is sensory, right? And then it's going to be integrated. So integration. In the central nervous system, and the central nervous system integrates by saying hot, how hot, too hot, do something about it. And then the do something about it command comes out through the peripheral nervous system as well, but that is considered motor. Okay, so we're going to focus on what the peripheral nervous system is doing. Please note that the peripheral nervous system doesn't do very much integration, because most of the integration happens in the central nervous system. So when we look at the peripheral nervous system functionally, we can divide it and say, okay, most of the time what it's doing is either sensation or motor activity, either information out or information in. So let's talk about the division of the nervous system that does sensory information in. This is called the sensory, or here's a new word for you, Afferent Division. It's actually pronounced afferent, and the other one's pronounced efferent, but I'm going to mispronounce them so you can hear the difference. So afferent or afferent nervous system. What that one is going to do is it's going to gather information from places that we call sensory receptors. And the sensory receptors are going to send the information through the afferent or sensory nervous system. That's the division of the peripheral nervous system, and then it's going to go to the central nervous system for integration. But there are two further subdivisions of the sensory or afferent, and that is based on really where the sensory receptors are. There's this one that's called the somatic sensory, and that finds its sensory receptors in skin and skeletal muscles and bones. So if you have like an itch on your skin, that's a somatic sensation that would have a sensory receptor like in your skin. Somatic sensation, division of the afferent nervous system, sends the signal through the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system for integration. Okay, but there's another place that you could have your sensation going on, and that is called the visceral sensory division. So visceral as in guts, and to oversimplify, if visceral sensory finds its sensory receptors primarily in the abdominopelvic cavity, like digestive, urinary, reproductive organs. So like menstrual cramps, those would be visceral sensations, right? Still, what would you do with it? You would do the same thing you did with it before. You would, for instance, send that visceral sensory information through the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system for integration. Okay? All right. So, and then if we look at the other division of the peripheral nervous system, it's the motor or efferent division. The motor or efferent division has a further subdivision as well. What the motor or efferent division is, it always sends information toward what we call effectors. And effectors are things that you can effect a change on. So muscles, all three kinds, and glands. So you can make muscles contract, you can make glands secrete. Okay, so the motor or efferent division has a further subdivision, and that is the somatic motor has a skeletal muscle effector. So this is the one that's often called the voluntary division. So it's mostly voluntary control of skeletal muscle contraction. So if I decide I'm going to pick something up using my biceps brachii, that would be the somatic motor division. And then I'll go through a couple of examples with you when I get finished with this. Okay, and then the other division is called the autonomic motor division. And that goes to cardiac muscle, smooth, and glands. Those are the effectors. And that one is not voluntary at all. The autonomic motor also has a subdivision that I'll tell you guys about later, which is the sympathetic division, which is often called the feeder breed, and the parasympathetic division. So later on, in like the next set of notes, we'll take this and do a little bit more detail on it. So let me just do a couple of different examples for you guys with this stuff to see if I can get you to sort of think it through with me. All right, so if I put my hand on a hot stove, I want to talk about what kind of sensory information and how it gets to the central nervous system and how I get it back out. So I want to put my hand on a hot stove, and then I want to respond by contracting my skeletal muscle to move my hand. So the sensory receptors, follow me, okay, are going to be in my skin, right? So that's somatic sensation. So I send that somatic sensations through the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system for integration. Good. And then my central nervous system says too damn hot, and it sends information out through the peripheral nervous system. But then this time, do I go sensory or motor? I go motor or efferent division, and I'm going to move skeletal muscle. So that's the somatic motor division, and the effector is skeletal muscle. Cool? Okay, I'm going to do a different example in a different color. Okay, different example, going to do it in green. Okay. All right, so this example, what I want to imagine is now I ate something really spicy, super spicy Thai food that I could not manage, and it ended up giving me diarrhea. Okay, so what's going to happen here is, where is the sensation first? Well, I irritated my digestive tract, so that is visceral sensation. So the visceral sensation finds sensory receptors in the digestive tract, sends it through the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system for integration, then sends it back out to give you the squirts. And I send it back out. Do I go afferent or efferent? I go efferent again. But this time, do I go somatic motor and contract skeletal muscle, or is that smooth muscle? That is smooth muscle effector, so I go through the autonomic motor division to the smooth muscle effector. Okay, so this is the terminology that you're going to try to get comfortable with, and it's going to take a little bit to get comfortable with it. But like I said, you don't actually stop using this in anatomy. You also use it in physiology. So Afferent, efferent, it's not how they're pronounced. They're pronounced afferent and efferent. And then I will come back and do sympathetic and parasympathetic a little later. Basically, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic are two subdivisions of the autonomic motor division. And what those do is they allow you to excite a tissue or inhibit a tissue. Kind of think of it like the cardiac muscle has both gas and brakes hooked up. But we'll come back to that one in just a bit. Just a bit. This all goes right here, or you can make it bigger if you want to. Okay? And pick up the next one in the next video.